What's going on, everybody? It's Dan here, and I'm joined by Ryan. How are you doing, Ryan?
Doing good.
And we are going to be
Lots of
doing the...
PRs lately.
What was that?
Lots of PRs lately.
Yeah, lots of PRs lately. We are going to be doing the first of two sets of PRs here, as voted on by the people. The Johto Division PRs will be first. A quick reminder about how we do things here with our power rankings, the methodology. The coach and playstyle are not taken into consideration. If you were a playoff coach last season, your team is not going to be more highly rated than a non-playoff coach. Just by default, it's all going to be about the things you drafted. And how we compare that is if we assume 100 equally skilled players were each given the team and then asked to play every matchup in a massive round robin. This is what we would project the final standings would be by team. So a higher rated team doesn't mean it has a positive matchup against every team underneath it, but just a more generally positive matchup against the league as a whole. And as Ryan always likes to say, these are not predictive either, because they don't take into account coach and play style, and they only really care about the mons that are being used. They're not predictive at all. And then we're going to get right into it. So yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at the first team we got on our power rankings, and we have the Flint Flareons. As you can see in the top left, Ryan and I both rated this team as last in the division, but it's a generally strong division, so we'll take that with a grain of salt. And Ryan, why don't you walk us through some of the basics of this team?
Yeah, one of the first things I will say is that compared to the last time we did VBA power rankings, this was a lot harder because a lot of the teams were a whole lot better. Just putting that very bluntly out there. Last time we did the PRs for VBA, it felt pretty easy to distinguish teams, and it wasn't as taxing. This go around for both the Johto and the Kanto division, it was pretty difficult to get some of these teams kind of placed where we wanted them to. But this was unanimous, and I guess we can kind of talk about why. So the Flint Flareons actually have a lot of really good tools. The Whimsicott's great. I love Rotom Heat in this format. I think fire types are in pretty short supply, so grabbing a good fire type is something I approve of. So then we have the Raichu and Drifblim, which is kind of where the problems start to seep in. Raichu Alola is not worth a tier 2 slot unless you have electric terrain, and specifically Pincurchin. Without having that electric terrain, Raichu Alola is pretty underwhelming. Like, yeah, sure, it's fast. It gets... I think it still gets Fake Out even without transfer moves, but it's not nearly as potent without that terrain abuse and without that rising voltage spam that kind of has given it a bit of a resurgence in doubles. Similarly with Drifblim, Drifblim without terrain is very suspect, especially on a team where the Tailwind setter is already insanely good. You already have a Whimsicott, so you don't really, which is priority Tailwind, so you don't really need a Tailwind setter that is slower and also can't activate its terrain quickly. Now there is the possibility of like a weakness policy Drifblim with Mr. Rhyme. However, I do think some of those kind of sets do lose viability in this sort of format. Having a Tailwind setter that can't be faked out is nice, but without that Unburden boost, it's a pretty slow Tailwind setter. Even though I would prefer Pincurchin to be on this team, in a vacuum, I think Vaporeon's great in this format. Really bulky water type. The Yawn support's really good. I think it gets a couple of screens. Scald's always great. Icy Wind's amazing for speed control. I actually think Vaporeon's a really solid mon here, and I like that it gives you a Fire, Water, Grass core. I just don't know if I would have preferred the Vaporeon stay and the Drifblim go, or something akin to that. Flareon, I'm not going to judge it. I'm not huge on Flareon myself, but it is the mascot of the team with the Flint Flareons, so I'm not going to judge that pick too harshly. However, it doesn't help defensive typing synergy a whole lot. Shedinja's pretty good in these kind of formats, but it's still weak to a lot of common attacks. I think it's a little bit better in this gen than it has been in the past, so I think that'll definitely have some viability. Porygon 2 is, I think, great. Trick Room setter primarily, but it also gets other good moves like Ally Switch and Eerie Impulse, and it can out-recover things, and it can really just be an obnoxious mon to play against. That said, I don't think its Trick Room setting is as consistent in this format. It's going to be a little harder to slap a Mental Herb on it, so I think it's a little bit more taunt bait. And its offensive prowess is good, but not amazing. Mr. Rime, I think, is one of the better support Pokemon in the format. I think this is a really good pick overall. Rhydon's okay for being, I think it's like tier 5.
Tier 5, yep.
Tier 4. Yeah, for being a tier 5, Rhydon's really good. Getting Lightning Rod in that low of a tier on a team that has a couple of, electric weaknesses, I think is solid, and Reboot is good. I think my main issue with this team is just that it doesn't flow together super nicely. I think the best kind of mode it has is set Tailwind with Whimsicott, bring in the Rotom Heat and the Vaporeon, and kind of try to whittle stuff down. But I think the overall offensive presence of this team is a little lacking, a little too support-oriented, and I think that it just doesn't have enough synergy to merit a lot of really good picks, is kind of my problem, where a lot of these picks are great, like in a vacuum, but you put them all together on the same team and they just don't mesh super well. And type cores are also missing pretty severely from this team as well. Got a big issue with rocket ground type moves, just overall. So
yeah, I can agree with a lot of what you're saying there. I will judge the Flareon a bit more harshly than you will, even though it's the mascot, just because it does double up, actually triple up on the fire typing, which seems a little suspect to me in this format. And, I know another coach has Pincurchin, but if you're coaching the Flint Flareons, you've got to trade an arm and a leg to try and get that thing or something else that can help you get some terrain for this Raichu and this Drifblim, because otherwise they're going to underperform the tier that they're in. With terrain, they will overperform the tier they're in. Without it, they won't be worth what you're paying for them. And maybe if you can't get some good terrain setters, you might want to consider trading them out for something with a bit more offensive punch that can help abuse that Tailwind. You've got really good Tailwind, but not a lot that really needs to operate under Tailwind, if that makes sense.
Yeah. The best mon here that operates under Tailwind is definitely that Rotom.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it just, I feel like some transactions are going to need to happen to kind of get this team in the sort of position it wants to be in. And it's got good tools. It's just that some of them are missing, and I think that because some of those picks, like the Raichu and Drifblim, aren't getting their full value. And then there are a few mons also that I think do have a little bit of questionable value, like the Reboot, the Rhydon a little bit. The Porygon 2 is good, but I don't know how much value you get out of that on a team that doesn't have really hard Trick Room mode. Mm-hmm. I think that because you're losing value in all those places, it was really hard to rate this team much higher. But it's got some great tools, and I think it can do well. But I would recommend a couple changes for this coach.
Yeah, before we move on to the next slide, I will say I would look up Flare Boost, which is the hidden ability on Drifblim that a lot of people don't actually know exists because they only think Unburden with it, and maybe that's something that you might be able to take advantage of with the Whimsicott to some extent.
Yeah, Flare Boost is fun.
Yeah, but moving on to the next team, we have the Coughing Smokers, who are coached by Trunks, who is a new coach to the VBA, but not new to Draft League, as he was participating with us in the GLDL. So his team here is Volcarona, Sableye, Corviknight, Nidoking, Executor A, Bouffalant, Stonejourner, Sock, Barraskewda, Palisand, and Galarian Slowpoke. So, first thing I noticed on this team is that Gyarados would be really good on this team. Well, I guess that's not the first thing I noticed, but I do notice that Gyarados would be really good on this team. And some of the positives are this Volcarona, Sableye, Corviknight, Nidoking. I think those are all going to be great performers. Corviknight's going to be able to get you up that sort of bulky Tailwind setter that I really like. Quash is fantastic support out of the Sableye. Volcarona, if you can not let it die to Rock Slides, can give you a couple different options from Redirection to some powerful Heat Waves, which I think are going to be big in this format. And then Life Orb Nidoking is an absolute nuke in this format. I think it's going to be really great. Barraskewda is another Pokemon that is very interesting. This is where I think the Gyarados might be a bit better in the slot. It is... Is it this? It's like the second or third fastest thing in this format at base 136 speed, and it completely ignores redirection. So it's got a lot of positives. It also dies to a strong gust of wind, and without redirection of its own to help protect it, it's going to be hit by It's going to be hit by moves a lot, and a lot of its offensive capabilities are really going to be neutered. And there are a couple just question marks I have on this team, namely the Executor A and the Palisand. I don't exactly know, like the Slowpoke as well, but maybe that's, I don't know, a Trick Room setter that you're just hoping with, but there's not really a fleshed out Trick Room mode on this team, and Executor A and Palisand in this format, especially without a Selgor, I think both want to have that fleshed out Trick Room mode. So there are a lot of question marks for me on this team. It's definitely got some high-end potential, a lot of power, but I don't know if it has the defensive synergy to stand up to a really spread move heavy meta like I'm expecting this season. But what are your thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm mostly worried about spread moves with this team. I actually don't. I like the Trick Room mode a lot better than you do. I think Alolan Executor is actually going to be pretty solid for setting Trick Room. Bouffalant is actually a pretty good mon for working in Trick Room, I think, in this format. It's bulky, it's got Reckless, it can kind of put out some good damage. I think that the Palossand is definitely my biggest question mark. I was looking at Palisand's move pool prior to this video just to make sure, but it didn't have anything that super stuck out to me as being like exceptionally great, especially on a team that already has ground type. Mm-hmm. I like Stonejourner in tier 5. That's a really, really good Pokemon. I actually wasn't sure how good it was. I was researching it live in the draft before I drafted it for you. Because I normally rate Stonejourner pretty high whenever I'm making one tier list because Power Spot's good and I just take other people's word for it. But when I actually started digging, I think Stonejourner is really, really good on this team, and I actually really like it next to things like Sableye and Corv. Trunks is a pretty good player and a coach. I think he'll bring this team to do better than 11th during the season. PRs aren't predictive, like we've said. But overall, I'm so worried about spread moves. Rock slides, heat waves, earthquakes, icy winds, all of those sorts of things look really scary. I think that there is most definitely a good amount of power on this team. I think the support pieces are pretty well placed, but because the typings aren't synergistic enough to really cover for a lot of those weaknesses, I am very worried about how this team is going to perform kind of in the long term of the season. That said, I actually like the Trick Room mode decently well. I think the Corv, other than just being a Tailwind setter, just like an Iron Defense Corv, it can be really tough for a lot of teams to break. Sableye is one of, I think, the best Prankster mons in this format, especially because it can't be faked out, so it gets to act for free. And Volcarona is a really scary Pokemon, but people are going to prep for it, and Quake Slide is going to be very prevalent, I think. A lot of the better teams are going to have it. So,
yeah, and if you'll notice, we differed on the power rankings here and came out to an average of 10.5. The next team also has a 10.5 average. Anytime there was that sort of tie, I just used my ranking as a general tiebreaker just for the sake of consistency. But speaking of that next team with the 10.5 average, we have the Miami Menchinos, however you want to pronounce it. I'm not even gonna try. But Ryan, why don't you break down the good and bad of this one for us?
Yeah, I like a lot of this team, what it has going on. I think there are some good picks, but I also think that this is another team where type cores are kind of giving me some questions. The best part of this team, hands down, is the Grimmsnarl, Metagross, Crobat. I love that. That is so strong. I think Metagross is going to be really solid in this format, especially next to a mon like Crobat or Grimmsnarl, where those can really support it, keep it alive. They can set Tailwind for it to let it click Earthquake and things like that. Metagross traditionally has done really well in past formats, and with the loss of a lot of these legendaries that gave it trouble, like Heatran and things like that, I think Metagross is going to be really, really good. So I really like that. I like the Aurora Veil on the Ninetales. I would have preferred to see like a Hail Sweeper. You do have Walrein, which I think is an interesting Pokemon. It gets Ice Body, So you can run like Leftovers Ice Body kind of stuff, and it can like heal a ton of HP every turn. And it can also, in general, Walreign's a really nice, annoying, bulky Pokemon, especially for Tier 4 value. Chinchino with Skill Link is an absolute threat. It's very fast. Tail Slap can OHKO a lot of Pokemon with Skill Link, like Choice Band or Life Orb. It's a little inaccurate. Coverage options are good on it. I think it's a little too one-dimensional, but I think it's strong. Espeon's a good Pokemon, but I don't super think it fits this team very well. I think that Chinchino and the Espeon kind of have a similar sort of niche, and you already have a Psychic type with the Metagross, so I don't think you needed to double up on that. Zuelis, I have no strong opinion on. I don't think it's an amazing Tier 5, but certainly it has some uses. Swampert's pretty good. It's pretty good. I think, outside of... because we've lost Hidden Power, grass coverage is actually a lot more limited in this decks, so I think that a lot of like those groundwater types gain a bunch of viability. I don't really know what Ivysaur is doing here. You don't have anything that says Sunny Day except for the Crobat, and I guess that's the strat. I don't really get it. And Stunfisk G, I think, is actually pretty good. I think that's also a Tier 5, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, for Tier 5, Stunfisk G is pretty good. I think that's a solid pick, even though it's some redundancies. My big issue with this team is that I think that there's just not... I think it has that similar lack of cohesion problem that the Flareons had, but almost a little worse. I think the thing I like about this team is that little corner of 4 Pokemon, the Grimmsnarl, Ninetales, Crobat, Metagross, is Chinchino, Swampert is what really kind of kept this team up for me. But there's some doubled types. I don't love the doubled Psychic and Water types. Those are types that are good, but I don't think are great to double a whole lot. And I think there's just kind of a lack of offense. Like, Grimmsnarl can be offensive, sure. Ninetales can do Blizzard spam, sure. Swampert's okay. Chinchino's good, but there's just a lot of frailty here. The type cores aren't fleshed out. I think there's a lot of picks that are basically worthless on this team, and I hate to say that, but I think the Ivysaur and Zuelis aren't going to really offer too much. And I'm similarly worried about spread moves with this team. One of the things is I really like the Grimmsnarl and the Ninetales, but those are both weak to steel moves. And you can kind of say similar things. Like, this team does not have good defensive switch-ins to a lot of things. Like, Disquake's really good, rock moves look really solid, I like ground moves into a lot of this team. Dark moves look decently free, actually, as far as those kind of things go. I don't know, it's just... some of the defensive type synergy is also not quite doing it for me, along with the offense being a little too focused on just a couple of Pokemon that I don't know if they have the kind of power that they need to break.
Yeah, that makes sense. One trade that I believe is available in the division that could really help this team, especially offensively, is if you like the water ice type that Walrein brings, just swap it for Arctivish. Get that Slush Rush, get that
Vicious Rend.
Rend. Give yourself another offensive type, then you can get Swampert swapped out for something that's a bit more in line with this team. Like, I think this team is a couple transactions away from having a really tough team to prep for, but as it is, I think they have 6 Pokemon that they want to bring to almost every set, and it's a really good 6, but when you've narrowed yourself down that much, it's a lot easier as an opponent to figure out how to beat it. Because if you can figure out how to beat Crobat, Grimmsnarl, and Metagross, this team's really going to struggle to beat you. But if you can't figure out how to beat that, and it's not the easiest thing in the world to beat, like, that's the cornerstone of of a potentially like top 3 team, then
one thing I will add to that, this team needs a Trick Room setter desperately. It has no Trick Room mode at all, which is part of the reason why I also rated it a bit lower than the team prior. Was the other team had, I thought, a pretty solid Trick Room mode. This team has none. So setting Trick Room against this team is actually decently free. I mean, it has pretty good bonds that function well in Trick Room. Most of the team functions fine in it, but I would highly, highly recommend getting something to help with that Trick Room mode a little bit.
I cannot wait to see this team play Raz. Man, both of them hating when Trick Room gets set. It's going to be absolutely beautiful. But
it'll be pretty great.
With that being said, let's move on to our next team, the Carolina Berserkers. We both actually like this team a lot, and I think at this point in the ratings for Johto, we're seeing Johto really like pick up ahead of steam in terms of these are all going to be really, really strong teams, tough to prep for and tough to beat on a week-to-week basis. And from here on out, they're all good teams, and we're having to get really, really nitpicky about this.
Yeah, hard agree. I think that Carolina Berserker Up are teams that I really liked. I had a tough time rating a lot of these teams, especially when we got into this range. This is where I had the most difficulty.
Yeah, I think the next 4 to 5 teams were very, very tricky to read. But with that being said, Arcanine, Blastoise, Raichu, Decidueye, Stoutland, Berserker, Rapidash, Riolu, Mamoswine, Combuskin, and Mantine. Okay, there's a lot to like here. Arcanine, super versatile, does a lot of things really well, but does basically nothing great. Blastoise, super versatile, does a lot of things really well, but basically nothing great. Raichu, actually just genuinely a great support. Stoutland does a lot of things really well, but basically nothing great. And I think you see like that's a trend throughout this team. It's one of the most versatile teams in the draft, but there's so much here that can do a lot of jobs really well, but I don't know if they have enough Pokemon that do 1 or 2 jobs at a super, super tip-top level. So I think they're going to be tough to prep for, they're going to be fun to prep with, but I think the maximum potential of the team is going to be a bit lower than some of the other teams that have these, like, mons with really, really great modes. Like, I do love the Fire, Water, Grass core, obviously. I would have loved to see a Dragon type to get a full Fantasy core, but Berserker and Rapidash, Galarian, like in tiers 4 and 5, that's a pretty good start to a Fantasy core at least. Mantine is criminally under-tiered in this format because Wide Guard is going to be huge. Combuskin, I could live without. Mamoswine, I think, is going to be a decent offensive output. No Sand mode for Stoutland means it's mostly going to be Intimidate, which means it's going to be reduced a lot in viability when you also have an Arcanine. So if you're looking for places to make an improvement, maybe that Stoutland position, or find a way to get something with Sandstream on your team, so it does have that versatility that it should have behind the Arcanine. But overall, I like a lot of what this team does. I just don't love a lot of what this team does. I like that it does a lot, but I don't love how it doesn't do 1 or 2 things at the top level. What about you, Ryan?
Yeah, I think this team has kind of a syndrome. I saw it more in the other division than this one, but this team has a bit of a situation where it has a lot of really, really good tools, but they're not always put together in such a way where I love them together. I love the first 4 picks. The Arcanine, Blastoise, Raichu, Decidueye, I think is great. Stealth Smash Blastoise is a nuke, especially if you can actually get Water Spout off without getting damaged somehow, which seems possible. Riolu is kind of underrated, I think. I think the coaching is not only good, like Prankster coaching is going to be good on this team, but it actually also gets Inner Focus, and its attack stat's not that high. So you actually can, like, Weakness Policy proc a Mamoswine or Rapidash Galar, which I think could be fun. Just as, like, kind of a... I wouldn't say it's, like, super consistent, but a fun, like, little gimmick. But yeah, my main issue is that when I looked at a lot of... Like, this team has some fantastic value across the board. I think Arcanine's one of the better tier 1s. I think Blastoise, Raichu, 2 of the better tier 2s. Berserker is one of the best tier 4s. Mantine should probably be tier 4 or 3. Mamoswine's great, especially in this kind of format, but I'm also looking at it, and I'm like, okay, we've got 2 water types. I actually almost don't love Blastoise here because I feel like the Raichu, Mamoswine, Mantine does basically everything you want Mamoswine to do, want Blastoise to do, but better. I think a Sandmon would have been really good here. There isn't really a Trick Room mode. There are, similar to a couple other teams, there are some good Trick Room mons, like Berserker does well in Trick Room. But my main issue is mostly just that the modes are a little, like, lacking in some respects. I think that, too, some of those offensive stats aren't quite as high as you want them to be. Like, Mamoswine's absolutely. Like, Mamoswine's got a great, really good, solid attack stat. I think Berserker's kind of in a similar boat. But you've got a lot of mons with, like, that kind of, like, base 100, base, like, 90-ish attacking stats, where if you're in that range, like, you really want to have a couple mons on your team, in my opinion at least, that are in that 120 to 130 range, just to give you that oomph, and this team doesn't have quite enough of that oomph for me. But yeah, I think double Intimidate core, good fake out users, good Tailwind, good wide guard, good a lot of things. I think this team can absolutely pull a lot of wins. I just don't think it can pull those wins as easily as some of the teams that we have placed above it.
Yeah, I would also agree with, if you can switch that Blastoise out for something better in Tier 2, I would do it, because I think Mantine is a Tier 5, absolute steal, and so good on this team. Like,
yeah,
that Blastoise is, I don't know.
A Gigalith.
A Gigalith. Gigalith isn't
available. Fix the sand mode, and it's not available, but even just like as an example, off the top of my head, I would love this team a lot more if it had something like that.
Yeah, I can agree with a lot of that, but with that being said, let's take a look at the Great Lakes Grimmsnarls. Waken's going to be very upset to see his team right here, but...
yes.
Ryan, let's see, why don't I have you take us through this team a little bit?
Yeah, so this team has some good stuff going for it, like a lot of good stuff. The biggest thing is that it has that Cinderace, Azu, Bisharp, Thwackey combo. I think that's super strong. Just overall, you've got a Firewater Grass core, and then this team is very physically oriented. So having the Bisharp there to deter Intimidate's really, really, really good. Double's a pretty good Tier 5. I like that you have the Noivern and the Reuniclus for Tailwind and TR respectively. I think Butterfree's slightly misplaced in this team. You already have a Tailwind with the Noivern. Yes, you can like Scarf Sleep Powder people, and you can get the Rage Powder redirection, but I don't think it's super consistent. I think that Butterfree a lot of the time is going to be fake out bait. Hitmonchan's pretty good, Haunter's pretty good. I know he traded Onix for Avalugg, right?
It doesn't matter, he drafted Onix, we gotta roast it.
Oh, yeah, okay, that's fair. This team on paper, I think I looked at it at first and I thought, yeah, this is a really, really good team, because I liked a lot of what it had going on. But the more I looked at it, the more I realized that it has kind of some issues. One of the first things is that it has like no form of spread damage at all. There is like Noivern is the best spread damage with like Heat Wave, and then Haunter gets Icy Wind. And like that's like the main spread damage this team has, which feels really bad. I noticed that Earthquake looks pretty good into a good chunk of this team. Not all of it, but pretty good. It's like good into that Bisharp Cinderace, and I actually think that one of the ways to kind of get around the Intimidate would just be running Charm on mods, right? I was looking at teams and I noticed a lot of Reflect, a lot of really good like Charm users, which I think give this team a lot of trouble. The Trick Room mode to me is good, but a little underdeveloped. I think it's basically a Reuniclus and then Prey Azumarill sweeps, which and Double can maybe set up some body press shenanigans. But I don't super love that overall. I think the team's really solid. Like, it's got a lot of good offensive threats. I think the Tailwind and TR are convincing enough for me to like those. But I overall was looking and I was like, one of my issues is that this team feels like it's going to be trading a lot. Like, it feels like you're going to kill a Mon or you're going to try to double a Mon and one wrong protect, and all of a sudden you don't get any damage off. And if your opponent has good spread, this team can get overwhelmed, I think, pretty quickly. So I think it's overall pretty good, but there are a couple elements that I think are sort of missing from this team that let it shine in this format. I think if this was like a Dynamax format team, it would be one of the best teams, period. Mm-hmm. And you do see some like more non-maxi mons in here, like the Thwackey and the Bisharp. And Haunter. I don't see those as much in max formats, but I think that overall, there are some elements that have been added into this format with this higher spread damage and things like that, where almost every single mon on this team is single target. And everything's just also a super known quantity, right? Like, Thwackey's going to set grassy terrain and fake you out. You know that the Noivern's probably setting Tailwind or clicking Hurricane or Draco Meteor or whatever, and it'll probably frisk your items. You know that Reuniclus is going to try to set Trick. Like, you know Azu's either going to Belly Drum or it's just going to attack you. Similarly with Cinderace, unless you run like Bulk Up or Court Change or something, you know that thing's just attacking you every turn, or you turning out. So I don't know. I think
the Taunt, Court Change, Electro Ball, Scorching Sand set.
That's the best set on Cinderace. That's what makes it a tier 1, but people don't know that. Yeah, I don't know. For me, there's a lack of versatility and a little too much linearity for me to really rate this team as highly. I think at a glance it looked really, really, really good, but as I kind of dug into the meat and potatoes of it, I noticed it wasn't taking advantage of a lot of like the things that I think are strengths in this format.
Yeah, I can agree with a lot of that. My biggest problem with this team is that Will-O-Wisp and Charm both exist and are both pretty common in this format, and man, does that suck if you're this team. Like, I ran Azumarill for a full season. If that thing gets burned or charmed, it's pretty useless. Yeah, I really think that sums it up. His special attackers aren't as good as his physical attackers, to the point where if you are running like max HP, some physical defense investment, and you're bringing Charm and Will-O-Wisp against it, he's going to have a tough time breaking a lot of teams because he doesn't have that special nuke outside of Reuniclus. And then Reuniclus is Reuniclus. It hits hard, but if you're not under Trick Room, it's also just going to die a lot of the time.
Yeah, and its coverage is so limited too. Reuniclus has a really, really, really big issue with getting coverage hits off in these formats. So,
yeah, I don't know how many times you want to run Focused Blast, but it's got less accuracy than Power Whip.
But to speak more positively, even though I think that there's some big weaknesses to this team, I mean, my God, Cinderace, Azumarill, Bisharp, Noivern, that's tough.
It's going to hit hard.
Like,
yeah.
That is tough to break. And that is part of the reason why this team gets its spot here.
Yeah, it's really weird because if you have the tools to deal with this team, you can deal with it. But if you don't, or you stumble with like a slightly suboptimal lead, it can end games in 3 turns, even in a non-max format.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's got the most offensive potential single target of any team in this format, and that is pretty scary as well. But I also think that its offensive potential is the most easily dealt with, which is why we've got it as sort of a middle-of-the-road team.
Yeah.
But speaking of middle-of-the-road teams, I don't know why I said it like that, but moving on to the next team, we've got the Trixie Tricos, who is coached by Otto. Otto is a new coach to the VBA, who is the 2-time defending champion of the VDL. So he is a very, very solid coach. His team here is... I really like it, and I liked it more than you, and then I convinced you to like it more, and now you like it more than me. But...
Well, kinda. I sort of... Okay, there's a couple teams where it was like... There was like a 3-team thing, and I put this team at the top of the 3. But... Yes. I still have... My criticisms still stand for this team, but I do think it's pretty good.
Yes, I think every team, like, in the 9 to 6 range is almost interchangeable in their rankings.
Yeah, they're pretty close.
This team has Garchomp, Charizard, Meowstic M, that's the prankster one, Starmie, Toxicroak, Trevenant, we've got the Carbink, we've got the Vikavolt, Aggron, Absol, and Lickilicky the God.
God.
First thing I obviously noticed with this theme is that Meowstic gets Sunny Day, and Charizard and Trevenant really like Sunny Day. So this team has some real potential to be really annoying with Solar Power Heat Wave Charizard. That's going to do a lot. If you put that next to a Garchomp that can either use Rock Slide or Earthquake, it's going to have some of the best spread damage in the format. And that's without putting that Garchomp next to the Vikavolt with Discharge. Like, best spread damage team in the division, most likely. And I really liked that on this team. I also like Trevenant with a Sunny Day setter, because if you run like a Harvest, Lumberry, rest set, it's going to be pretty hard to kill. Like, that's the most annoying thing to play against, is Harvest Lumberry Rest when you are in the sun, because you just get the Lumberry every turn. And then you just put, like, Leech Seed and Horn Leech on it. It's the most annoying endgame to play, because you know you're losing, and you hate it, and you can't stop it. But I think this team does have its issues as well. It doesn't have a Drought user. He got sniped his Drought user, and I think that his team would be so much better if it didn't have to rely on that Meowstic to do so much. I think the Toxicroak is really good. I think the Starmie is pretty good as well. But it's solid. Its speed control, though, is where I'm having the most issues. Like, yeah, Trevenant can set Trick Room, Carbink can set Trick Room. Its Trick Room mode is decently well fleshed out. But if you want to go fast, your speed control is like Thunderwave Meowstic, and that's how you're going to try and win this game. And that,
yeah, Thunderwave Meowstic and like Thunderwave or an Icy Wind Starmie are the two big things.
Yeah, Garchomp and Charizard just don't have enough speed by themselves to function without Tailwind or another form of speed control to at least some extent. And I think that's where this team really suffers. If it had a consistent Tailwind setter, like, very, very easy top team. But I think without it, they're going to struggle against opposing Tailwind, because they've got some major weaknesses that they're going to have to deal with, namely that Charizard and Garchomp are both quad weak. But Ryan, why don't you take us through what your thoughts are on this team?
Yeah, I went a lot of back and forth on this team. One thing I really like about this team overall is that I actually really like a lot of the individual picks a lot. Like, I like the Garchomp Vikavolt a lot. I think that's really insane spread damage. I think Vikavolt is super underrated. I think it really makes that Trick Room mode a hell of a lot more viable. We didn't really talk about it a whole lot, but I think Aggron, Absol, and Licky are great low-tier picks. Absol is actually really solid in formats like these. Sucker Punch is a great revenge tool, and it gets some decent coverage options, which I think helps this team out a lot. I think the cores here are pretty solid overall. It's got Firewater Grass, it's got Fairy Dragon Steel. Licky is nice for opposing weather. Mostly, it doesn't do a whole... I don't think he's going to be able to get Belly Drum Licky set up very often, but the 1 week he does, it'll be good. Yeah, I think my issue is that I think that this team has the highest potential spread damage of any team, but I think it also has a really difficult time potentially setting it up, because you know what that Meowstic wants to do. It's going to click Fake Out turn 1, and then try to set Sun the next turn, or it's going to Protect, and then it's going to try to set Sun. Like, 99% of the time, that's the play, especially if you see something like a Charizard or on Trevenant in Team Preview. And because of that, I think that makes that, because so much of this team funnels into that, that's a little scary for me. I actually think the Trick Room mode is much more viable than the Fast mode, which is a little odd. I think Toxicroak's really good in this format. I do like... in general, I think Garchomp's going to be pretty good in this format, but I'm just worried about opposing speed control. Like, you were talking about, like, opposing Icy Wind. I think, like, an Icy Wind Rock Slide is, like, a very nice, like, potential lead option into this team. I think that the reliance on this Meowstic is a little heavy for my taste. But this team has some really good... One of the things this team nails that a lot of teams don't, it has good physical offense, and it has really good special offense. You've got that Garchomp, Aggron, that Toxicroak, really putting Absol putting out that physical damage, and you've got that Zard, Starmie, Vikavolt really giving you that special variety that I think you really desperately needed. Carbink's also one of the better tier 5s in terms of like Trick Room and things like that. I think it's a pretty good team overall. I like this a lot on the whole. I do worry, though, that I think that, similar actually to a few other teams, I think there's a lot more role versatility here than the past teams, but I'm worried that it's still maybe a little too linear for my tastes in some respects. So I think this will be a really good team, though. I'm excited to see Otto play it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he will get that licky to belly drum up and 4-0 somebody at least once, and I'm gonna chuckle when it happens.
That'll be great. I'm excited.
But moving on to the next team, we've got the Dutch Drapions, who is another new coach to the VBA, but Emilius is in the BTL league with me currently and doing pretty well in that league. So Ryan, why don't you talk us through this team first?
Yeah, so unlike the last team where Dan and I had a conversation about it, and Dan was trying to talk me into liking Otto's team a bit better, and then over time I came around. We had the reverse. With this team, I was telling Dan he rated it way too low initially, and now he's rated higher than me. So, Dutch Drapion's team. I think this team is overall really solid. So you got the Dragapult, Lucario, Slowbro, Obstagoon, Nidoqueen, Torracat, Maractus, Togekiss, Rotom Fan, Mr. Mime, and Ninjask. So first things first, I really just like Togekiss Dragapult. As a combo, those two are very solid. The Lucario feels pretty good here. It gives you something that's kind of a nice resist. Lucario gets a lot of good priority too. In this kind of a format, I think that a setup Lucario next to like Togekiss is pretty viable. I think that support Dragapult is really good next to this Togekiss, along with a setup Dragapult with a support Togekiss, which is where I think this team really shines, in that I think a lot of these top picks have some of that flexibility that some of these other teams have kind of not had as much. The Torracat, I think, is super value for tier 4. Intimidate support with parting shots really great. Nidoqueen is an absolute beast of a Pokemon. It also gives you a Disquake combo with the Rotom Fan, which is nice if you potentially want to go for that, even though you usually won't. Usually Nidoqueen will instead run not physical sets, but special in this kind of a format, but I could see either. Obstagoon is the mon I'm most curious to see how it performs. In theory, Obstruct is really good, and you've got that Togekiss that can redirect fighting moves for it, so I think like a Gut set with Facade also gets a lot better. So I'm really interested to see how Obstagoon does. I think that the parting shot support with that and the Torracat really helped me with this team a lot. Maractus for tier 5 is pretty good just for the water absorb. I think that makes the Storm Drain. That'll make the Slowbros, setting Trick Room a lot better. Mr. Mime's super underrated support, really good support Pokemon. Filter's a great ability, especially in this kind of a format where it can actually get pretty defensive. And its fake out screens and things like that are good. And I think Rotom Fan's one of the best tier 4s available in the draft. My only real issues with this team were ice moves are super good into it. Dragapult, Togekiss, Rotom Fan all seem like Nidoqueen are all pretty big offensive players. They're all super weak to Icy Wind, which is super bad. Some of the offense I think requires a little bit of setup, not a lot of things like come out the gate swinging with a ton of offense. I feel like this will require a bit of setup, but I just really like the tools on this team, and the versatility's good. I think it has some pretty good potential spread damage options. I think the typings are, outside of the major ice weakness, are overall pretty good. So I'm a pretty big fan of this team on the whole. I think it'll do well. But I want to hear your thoughts, Dan.
Yeah, so I'll first talk why I was initially lower on this team than I ended up being. And it's that this team, I think, would be a lot better in a Dynamax format. Outside of the Nidoqueen Torracat, which I think is, and Obstagoon, which I all think are really good outside of Dynamax, but if you can get Dragapult, Togekiss next to each other in a Dynamax format, it's great. If you can threaten beat up onto Lucario in a Dynamax format, it's great. Rotom Fan launching max Airstreams, even Slowbro as a potential max option. Like, if this was a Dynamax format, this team would absolutely be amazing. But it not being a Dynamax format, I don't know how good Dragapult's going to be. I don't know exactly what the Lucario is going to do to justify a tier 2 slot. Slowbro is still going to be pretty solid. Togekiss is going to lose a lot of its potential offensive punch without access to max Airstream, and its max moves really gave it a lot of ability there. Like, that was my initial thought, was like, this team isn't designed to operate without Dynamax as well as some of the other teams are. But I do think that Dragapult Togekiss just needs to be respected enough by itself. Lucario being a Steel type, it's not Excadrill, but it is another decently offensive Steel type. And then that Obstagoon Nidoqueen Torracat, I just kept coming back to that, and that eventually sold me. Like, I think Rotom's great value. Yeah, I think Ninjask is okay. Mr. Mime's fine, but I think that those tier 3 and early tier 4 picks, like, I think that's where the value of this team is. I think Nidoqueen is going to be one of the best attackers in this format. I think Obstagoon is going to be super versatile, can run all 3 abilities, can do a lot of different and interesting things. You never know if it's going to be offensive or defensive. And then I think in this format, Torracat is going to be phenomenal with the Violite. It's going to have Parting Shot, Fake Out, probably it's going to run Overheat a lot to get access to Snarl. I think that's the kind of support in tier 4 that really sells me on this team, because it's got that sort of damage mitigation ability that some of the frailer things that really
it doesn't get Snarl. This is a quick correction.
Okay.
I'll check that, but I used it for a whole season and I recall being annoyed. Yeah, it doesn't get Snarl.
Okay.
It does get Will-O-Wisp.
It gets Will-O-Wisp, but I think it's that type of support option that's going to be really good to help this team. Does Obstagoon get Snarl? I feel like Obstagoon probably gets Snarl.
Obstagoon has to get Snarl. Come on, it's Obstagoon. I'll check that. Yeah, it gets Snarl.
So I think that area is fantastic value for where he got it, and I think that really brings up this team for me, because I think the rest of the team would really like to have Dynamax, but it's going to be able to mitigate so much damage and have that non-Dynamax nuke in the Nidoqueen that it might be able to let the rest of the team function as though it had Dynamax, if that makes sense. And that's why I really came around on this team. So
yeah, I also just want to comment that yes, this team's very Ice Weak, but one thing I actually kind of like about it that's funny is that I feel like a lot of the time you'd want to click Icy Wind against it, but that Dragapult can run Clear Body, so that thing can still maintain really, really good speed control in the format. And I think that with screen setup and breaking swipe and even just like offensive D-dance and things like that, I think it's going to be difficult to prep for overall.
Yeah, there's a lot of versatility here. But moving on to the next team, we are into the top 5 with the Pittsburgh Steel types. Here we have Incineroar, Galarian Weezing, Jellicent, Copperajah, Galvantula, Togepi, an absolute unit, Haxorus, Miltank, Beheeyem, and Unfezant. So there are a lot of things I like about this team. First of all, Incineroar, obviously great in this format. Like, I know I was memeing in chat a lot talking about how, it might not be fantastic, whatever. It's top 3 Pokemon in this format. Incineroar, Indeedee, and Rillaboom. Top 3 easy in this format. Weezing, I think the ability to turn off abilities is actually going to be more useful for this team than for a few other teams. Like, does this team still want abilities a lot of the time? Yes, but it needs them less than other teams that I've seen Weezing on and been not as happy with its placement.
Yeah, plus, I also like Misty Terrain on this team too a lot, which I want to add as a comment. We'll get into that later though.
Yeah, absolutely as well. Trick Room mode. Trick Room mode is awesome on this team. You've got Jellicent, Copperajah. Already, I'm like, that's fine by itself. Beheeyem can run Power Herb, Meteor Beam, and just crush some stuff. It can also just run Life Orb Analytic sets and do a lot of damage. Togepi with After You. That's going to be really good in Trick Room. It can let you bring anything into Trick Room. The Absolute Unit has like a base speed of 5, and it can run Belly Drum sets.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is an absolute unit. And then the fast mode here is also pretty good. Haxorus is going to hit really hard. Galvantula's got the Compound Eyes. I believe it also has Electro Web sets, which is going to be.
It gets Electro Web, yeah.
Yeah. Unfezant is not the best Tailwind setter in the world, but it's fine. And then Incineroar is, of course, the obvious glue piece here. So I think there's a lot to like in this team, and I think it is very, very scary to go up against. So I've had just like a bunch of positives to say about this team. If we're looking for negatives, it is ground weak a lot of the time. Obviously, you can run Levitate on Weezing and make it less so, but that doesn't feel good. Its spread damage could be better, but Overall, I think this team is very, very, very solid. But what do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, I think this is a super solid team. My only real complaints with it really are just that there's a couple too many normal types for my taste. I think that having Munchlax, Miltank, and Unpheasant all on the same team feels a little unnecessary. I think that the speed control is pretty good. I like the Trick Room mode a lot more than the fast mode, like you do. I think Unpheasant's a pretty consistent Tailwind setter, but I don't think it's that great outside of that. I think the Incineroar I feel like a lot of the fast mode is pretty mid-speed, and I think Unpheasant and Galvantula help that a lot, but I don't know if they're quite enough to put it over the edge compared to a lot of the other fast modes we've seen. But yeah, the Trick Room mode's really good. You got stuff like the Water Spout Galvantula, or Water Spout, not Galvantula, Jellicent, which I think is good. Haxorus is really nice. I like that there's 2 Unnerve users on this team as well. I like that you have both Haxorus and the Galvantula that can force people to not eat berries, which I think is really good on a team like this, where there's some weaknesses to abuse. One thing on this team is a lot of the special bulk is kind of lacking, and I really like Misty Terrain to help with that. Kaparaja has kind of notoriously bad Spadef, which I think that helps with, similar to Haxorus. So I think like Misty Seed on those are going to be really potentially solid. I also think that with the Wheezing too, you really don't want to see a Haxorus or a Kaparaja get burned. So I do think that it helps with some of that Will-O-Wisp support there. I think Munchlax is pretty good. I think he'll consistently be able to get Belly Drum off at least once or twice. Yeah, it's just pretty overall solid. I think this is a really good team. I do think the ground weakness is a bit of an issue. I think that I feel like the fast mode isn't quite as strong as I want it to be. But the overall typing, the utility it has, and it has some of those, it has some of those powerhouse pieces. Something I've mentioned a few times is that there's a few teams where I'm like, man, I really wish they had something to give it that oomph. When you got something like Haxorus, Kaparaja, Behem, I'm like, okay, that's like where your oomph comes in. And then you have those really nice support pieces with the Wheezing and the Incin and the Galvantula and those kind of things, I think really flesh out that offense and let it shine pretty well. So that's why I rated this team pretty high.
Yeah, I think this is a textbook like Trick Room first team that has a fast mode. It's not a team that has a Trick Room mode. But yeah, I do think it's going to be really good in that role. But up next we have the Sussex Sableyes. So Ryan, why don't you give us a little breakdown here?
Yeah, this team, so the Sussex Sableyes, they've got Indeedee, Ninetales, Mandibuzz, Flygon, Sneasel, Slurpuff, Mawile, Slowking, Armaldo, Lilligant, and Quagsire. So this is an interesting team. It has some pretty well-defined modes off the bat. You've got the Indeedee Slurpuff. That's obviously a really, really powerful combo. Even with Indeedee F not having the best special attack compared to Male, having that combination really allows Indeedee F to actually become a major offensive threat. With the Fake Tear, String Shot support, that kind of thing, those expanding forces can really start to rake up damage quickly. Similarly, you also have a pretty well-defined Trick Room mode with that Indeedee as well, with the Indeedee Slowking allowing Slowking to set Trick Room. And one thing I love about Slowking as a Trick Room setter next to Indeedee, I used it a whole season myself, is that when you have a Slowking out on the field next to Indeedee, well, you can also click Expanding Force with it after it's done. So unlike a lot of other Trick Room setters that are kind of passive once they set Trick Room, Slowking next to Indeedee really just keeps hammering out damage. Mandibuzz, I think, is an amazing Pokemon in a non-max format. Yeah, it's a slower Tailwind, but it's a really good Tailwind. And it's super bulky, it's super hard to kill. Foul Play's super annoying, Snarl's really good, especially for this comp. I think that's going to be really solid. You can also just run it with a seed, a Psychic Seed, and then it's unkillable, basically. It's really fun. Ninetales Lilligant is the Sun mode. I think that's solid. I actually would have preferred Lilligant be a different mon, maybe like a Vileplume, mostly just because Lilligant's offensive coverage is a little lacking, and I think that pure grass typing isn't doing it a ton of favors. Flygon's okay. I don't know how good it's going to do in this format. I'm generally not a huge Flygon fan, but this team, if it's going to grab a Dragon type, it wants one that has Levitate, so I think that's pretty solid. It doesn't really have any like big ice weaknesses, so I think that's fine. Sneasel's a great support mon. It can really do a lot. I don't know if it's quite worth a tier 3, but it's definitely good. While for tier 5 Intimidate's incredible. And Quagsire with Unaware can be annoying. It also gets Yawn and it has Earthquake, Scald, that kind of thing. It's a Quagsire. It's basically just really obnoxious, but it's pretty good at being really obnoxious. I normally love Armaldo. I'm actually a huge fan of it. I think 125 base attack with battle armor and Swift Swim is super good. That said, there isn't really a rain mode on this team, so I don't know. I feel like outside of like being a Trick Room sweeper kind of next to that Indeedee Slowking, I don't know what it does. My big thing with this team is it feels like the modes are really good, but I'm not sure I like how all the pieces quite fit together, and I feel like not all the picks are as optimized as they could be. I feel like the Flygon, Sneasel, Lilligant, Quagsire could all look like different mons, and I'd like this team a lot more and put it in the #1 slot. Which is kind of where my issue with it lies. I think it's overall pretty good, though.
Yeah, I agree. I think this team having so many modes is going to be really hard to prep for, and if you see 2 or 3 of them in team preview, it's still going to be hard to know what to lead against, because if you lead something that beats Indeedee Slowking and it loses hard to Ninetales Lilligant, that's going to really suck for you. And I just really love Mandibuzz. That's probably a little bit of personal bias creeping in as well. I've been using it for a full season in the BTL, and this thing can survive anything, and I say that advisedly. Yeah. Like, it survives Zacian Behemoth Bashes if you want it to, or Behemoth Blades if you want it to. Like, it does a phenomenal job in its role. I think it's better Suicune, if I'm being honest, in a format where Suicune is banned. And I think that it adds a lot of potential value to this team, especially the Flygon, which I am not sold on, but if it's going to succeed, this is the team that puts it in position to succeed. So if you can get it behind Tailwind, maybe give it a Life Orb, I think it has some damage output potential as well. Mile, great value. I just think this team does a lot well enough that it's going to be incredibly hard to play against. I think in battle, the best 4 on this team isn't going to stack up to the best 4 on some other teams, but it's part of the prep and mind games where you don't know what 4 he's going to bring, and it's going to be so much harder to not bring something suboptimal against what is eventually brought.
Yes, I would agree. Also, Slurpuff in tier 4 is like very stupid good value.
Yes,
just as a side note, Slurpuff probably should have been tier 3.
Yeah, it should not be in a lower tier than Thievul.
Yeah, no, Thievul is much worse than Slurpuff. Slurpuff is, especially if you have Indeedee, is probably one of the best tier 1s. I actually have a similar problem with Drifblim being in tier 3, but both teams that drafted Drifblim in both divisions don't have terrain. I don't even know how that happened. So, well,
yep.
we'll let that be.
Yeah, but let's go ahead and move on into our top 3. So in third place right now we've got the West Side Weezings, coached by Rolo. Big turnaround for Rolo in my power rankings, where I rated him as the worst team in the VBA last season. This team's legit.
Yeah, this team slaps.
Yeah, Ryan, I'll let you break it down first, and then I'll go into it, because I did help Rolo do some draft prep, so I'll let you break this down first.
So the big thing this team has going for it is just modes are good. So I actually am going to ignore my load because I really want to talk about that Dracozolt Gigalith is super strong. Anytime that you have a Sand Setter with something with like Bolt Beak, that's going to be ridiculous. And then you combine that with Tank Growth, which I think is a super good support piece for this team, giving you a nice bulky redirector that really requires some attention and some prep. And then to kind of bolster sort of this Trick Room mode, you have the Dusknoir and the Hatterene. And both of those mons I really like in a Trick Room mode with a Gigalith, because Gigalith also hits really, really hard. Having that really fast Sand mode and then also coupling that with a really good-looking Trick Room mode I think is great. Dusknoir I think is going to work a lot better as an offensive threat than it has in the past, because it got Poltergeist added to its move pool. So it finally has like a good stab move to use, and I think Hatterene is going to be really good in a format like this. It can't be taunted, so even if like Rolo leads something like Tangrowth Hat and you taunt Hat, well, you'll get taunted yourself because Magic Bounce is really good. I think that consistency of that Trick Room mode and the consistency of the Sand mode, really great. Fletchender, I think, is a really, really, really budget mon to give you some Tailwind. Similarly with Purloin, I think Purloin it gets basically all the same moves as Liepard. The big issue is that it's just a lot frailer. I think on a Sand team, it might struggle a bit because, you go down to Focus Ash and then die to your Sand chip, but we'll kind of see how that works out. I really like it, though, as a support piece in theory. I actually super like the Rotom Frost on this team a lot. I think that gives you a lot of utility. It gives you a much-needed special attacker to complement that Hatterene and Milotic. And speaking of Milotic, I think Milotic is amazing on this team. I've seen the combination of Milotic, Dracozolt, Gigalith before in draft. It is super strong. Very tough to prep for. Competitive Milotic is really good at maintaining speed control. Marvel Scale is really hard to break on a team that's already very bulky. It's just annoying, and the Coil set with Hypnosis is so good. So like for a tier 1 slot, that really glued the whole team together super nicely for me. My only real complaints with this team are, I think Galarian Linoon is very meh. The move pool's not great. Yeah, you can slap an Eviolite on it. I don't think it's going to do a whole lot. And I think the Larion should probably be replaced with a better tier 5. I don't know what, though, yet. But it doesn't feel like it fits the team super well when Gigalith is already doing everything it does, but much better. But yeah, I think this team is great. I do not have a whole lot of complaints other than those low-tier slots. I think it's got... And I would prefer a little bit more like special offensive coverage, I guess. But outside of that, I think the Tailwind mode's solid enough. I think the Trick Room mode is amazing. I think the Sand mode is plenty viable, and I think that it has some nice glue pieces to make sure that things work well throughout its sets. It just has a couple pieces that I would swap out.
Yeah, I feel very similarly here. If those tier 5 slots were switched out with like decent tier 5 special attackers, I don't know if Exploud is available in this division, for example, but like a Specs Boom Burst it might be something that this team enjoys. But I did help Rolo in prep for this, and this team checks all the boxes that I like to see checked. It has really good Tailwind, it's got solid Trick Room, it's got really good weather, it's got good ways to deter Intimidate from its best mode, which is going to be its weather. It's got decent redirection in the Tangrowth, it's got some solid type cores. The one thing I'm not 100% sold on is in that Trick Room mode, the Hatterene. I don't know how good Hatterene's going to be without its Gigantamax form, but I imagine that it's going to be fine. And even if it isn't, there's enough here that I think is going to be really good, that even if Hatterene is worse than I think it's going to be, I still really, really like a lot of what this team does. Just improve those tier 5s, and this team's pushing for that 1 slot. I've got only really good things to say about it, and I think it is going to be a massive threat. Also, the team logo, terrifying. I don't like it, not at all. Go ahead. Anything else, Ryan, before I move on from that?
Yeah, no, really nice job to Rolo. That's a big jump from season to season, but I mean, this is a really good team. I didn't even know this was Rolo's team because I think Rolo rebranded.
Yes.
I rated this team totally blind. I didn't even remember who was coaching it. There you go.
He's rebranded from the Clinton Clefables to like Hell's Weezings or whatever that is.
Yeah.
But moving on to another team that we think has improved from a lot of past drafts, we've got Raz and the Detroit Delmise. So we've got Hydreigon, Talonflame, Aegislash, Hitmonlee, Pincurchin, Tangela, Delibird, Marowak, Aromatisse, Swoobat, and Caracosta. So, at first glance, I didn't like this team as much as I ended up liking it, because, I thought, yeah, it's a decent team. It's got some synergies. Hydreigon, I don't know if it's the best tier 1. Talonflame and Aegislash, I don't know if they're the best tier 2s. But they work really well with what this team has. And what this team has is, first of all, the two best tier 4s in the format, in Tangela and Marowak Kanto, which are stupid in tier 4. Like, they're gonna be massive this whole time. Kanto Marowak can operate in or out of Trick Room and Tailwind, and it's just gonna be an absolute menace on this team. It's got an Electric Seed Hitmonlee. That's gonna hit hard. There's no way around it. It's got
or just a reckless Hitmonlee. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Like,
it's got Talonflame. It's got, so that's great Tailwind. It's got Aromatisse. Great Trick Room. Can't be taunted. Fantastic. It's got Caracosta. No one really cares about Caracosta. It's got...
Well, I like Caracosta. We'll get in that later.
Okay. It's got Aegislash. Aegislash. Super solid without Dynamax. Like, yeah, it's been nerfed since its heyday, but I'm not going to complain about it in the tier. It's a very, very bulky steel type with good offenses when it wants it. It can do some threatening things, and I think it complements the Hydreigon defensively pretty well, so I think they work well together. Delibird, very underrated tier 5. I'm excited to see what he does with it. Overall, I think a lot of this team works really well together, and I just think he's got really, really good speed control and massive value picks with Hitmonlee, Pincurchin, Tangela, and Marowak. I just think the amount of value he got from those picks. Oh, and Aromatisse, which I think is tier 3. Like, the amount of value from those picks is just absolutely insane. I am surprised that he was able to get all of them, but because he got all of them, I think this team's going to be fantastic because he's got just such a deep team with so many different options. It's going to be so hard to prep for.
Yeah, his team's real. I like this team a lot. I think that, like, Amon like Hydreigon's actually going to excel in a format like this, and I think it especially excels because of some of the speed mechanic changes to Tailwind. I think, like, that Draco Meteor, that Dark Pulse is going to be really good. Hitmonlee's just an absolute nuke, especially, and it's the fastest fake out in the game, which is nice. I like that Pincurchin gives this team some much needed spread damage I was looking for, the outside of the Marowak Earthquake slot. You can even just lead like Marrow Talonflame, and you can just set Tailwind, and Marowak can just start eating people alive. One thing that doesn't get mentioned enough with Aromatisse is that Aromaville also affects your allies, I believe. So one thing that's kind of interesting about setting a TR with this team is that not only can you not taunt Aromatisse, but if he leads Tangela with it, you also can't taunt Tangela, which means Tangela can just like click Sleep Powder with impunity, which is that's a little scary, I think, and it lets him scout really well. Yeah, I think this team has some good special offense with the Hydreigon, Aromatisse, Pincurchin, Caracosta, and even Tangela. Tangela's got base 100 special attack, so it's not actually a huge slouch there. It's not great, but it's solid. And then you've got those really nice offensive threats. I think Aegislash with King's Shield, Swords Dance, then like Iron Head, Shadow Claw, or like that sort of thing is going to be really, really strong if you pilot it well. This team is going to require really good piloting and really good prep, I think, to an extent. But it's got such value across the tier list. I mean, it was really hard to rate this team much lower than number 3, where I put it, because I was just sitting there like, man, there's so much like stuff here that I feel like should be in higher tiers, and so much of it works super well together to make it just a really stellar team overall. I think this is probably one of my favorite drafts Raz has ever done. Caracosta with Shell Smash, by the way, is a threat. It's pretty good with that. They can even run, like, I think a mixed offense set. And Swoopback gets simple with Baton Pass, which is goofy, but I would love to see it. Simple, nasty plot. Swoopback's also kind of fun. It's a nice little gimmick. And Delibird's a nice fake out user. This team needed one for tier 5. I think that's fine. It also gets Icy Wind and some other cheeky stuff. I used it for a whole season in a Dynamax format even, and I thought it was okay for a tier 5. So, nice job. This is a really good team. Yeah, it's got some 4x weaknesses, which I think is the biggest problem with it. And Earthquake looks pretty good into a lot of his team, but other than that, I like it.
Yeah, I think it's really solid. I'm looking forward to see what it does with it this season. But moving on to our number 1 team in Johto, and we both after the draft looked at this and immediately said, yeah, this is the best team in the division, and it was a rather wide margin as well. Is going to be Goomer with the Bolton Bashers. Ryan, why don't you tell us why this team is nuts?
This team is just bananas. Okay, first off, this is Tier 2 Comfey always feels really high to me. This is the best Comfey team I have seen in like a non-max thing ever. So for those of you who don't know, Comfey gets a lot of benefits from grassy terrain. One of the most notable is that its floral healing actually does 2/3 of a Pokemon's HP whenever you want to heal it. So if you look at how bulky most of his team is, that means that he can heal all these bulky Pokemon basically almost to full for free, which is insane. Not only that, but it's also his Trick Room setter, which I think is really good. Rillaboom is hands down the best Pokemon, I think, available outside of maybe Incineroar and Indeedee. I think there's an argument there. But when you have a Rillaboom team constructed like this, it's a little bit difficult to argue that Rillaboom is not really, really good. Archeops I really like in Tier 2. He has the ability to keep that thing out of defeatist range pretty easily. And not only that, but Archeops is, I believe it gets Tailwind. So he's got a Tailwind setter there and a Rock Slide user that's really, really strong, really potent. Slowking Galar is a really consistent Trick Room setter. And he's got some ground weaknesses, but he's also got a Rillaboom. So, you know, with that grassy terrain, that Slowking Galar, Magmortar, and the Magnezone all get significantly better because you're sitting there like, oh, well, I'll just Earthquake. Well, it's like, well, you can't Earthquake, so you have to high horsepower or Earth Power into those slots. And then all of a sudden things get a lot sketchier because he can protect against those things. So minimizing those weaknesses on those ground weak mons, I think, is really smart. He has the, I think, Magmortar, as far as Tier 3 fire types go. I don't like Magmortar on the whole, but on this team it fits pretty well. Pangoro is a great Tier 4, especially for like Trick Room. I think it rounds out some of this team really nicely. Altaria for a Tier 5 is okay. It also gets Tailwind, but it's mostly used for like Cloud 9. There's a lot of opposing weather in the division. Having an Altaria there seems like a good kind of counterbalance to that. Magnezone is the most good or bad Pokemon you'll ever play against. Sometimes Magnezone will eat a team alive. Other time Magnezone is trash. I think it'll do pretty well though in this format. I think you'll see a little bit more of like a Scarf variant with like Volt Switch to kind of let it pivot a little better. Golisopod's an absolute beast. That thing has
unfortunately,
ridiculous...
at time of recording, he has dropped Golisopod.
Oh no! What does he have now?
Clawitzer.
Okay, I can get behind Clawitzer. Golisopod's my boy though, so I'm a little mad right now, Goomer. Can't drop my boy like that. You did need another special attacker though. That was one of my criticisms of the team. So Clawitzer will do really well there. It's mostly more of a Trick Room kind of mon, but having those really, really powerful boosted Mega Launcher attacks is super strong. Golurk is an absolute beast in Tier 4. I was really shocked to see it in Tier 4. It should have probably been Tier 3. It has really, really good offensive coverage. Iron Fist is a great ability, so is No Guard. It can work really well in Tailwind with that Archeops that gives him a guaranteed Disquake combo that's really, really strong. Or no, not Disquake, Quick Slide combo that's super strong. And then he also gets just a ton of power out of that thing. And then Kangaskhan is the only Fake Out user that can hit Ghost types in the format. It's super bulky. The Last Resort set's really good, and it has a nice utility move pool to even back that up for further speed control. I just think this team's great. I think that this team really took its Tier 1, tied the team around it super well, and not only did it tie it around it super well, but it has those offensive threats that you need to really like make it a little overwhelming to play against. My only real critique is some of the speed tiers are pretty middling without the speed control setup. Like you kind of have to get the Trick Room or the Tailwind off for some of these speed tiers to be like within the ranges you want. But man, this is a really brutally tough team, I think, to prep and play against. I think it's going to have a really successful season.
I can agree with that. The only repeated type on the entire team is Flying between Altaria and Archeops, I believe. So yeah. It's got a lot of type coverage, not a lot of shared weaknesses. Rillaboom should have been banned in this format. Like, it's ridiculously good. It is a Tapu. It just doesn't have the name Tapu. Like, Regice got banned and Rillaboom didn't, and that makes me sad. If it was Tapu Bulu, Team Still Nuts, but it's Rillaboom, which is just better than Tapu Bulu.
Yeah, because it gets Grassy Glide, and Grassy Glide is broken. Yeah. Well, you know, Choice Band of Rillaboom, even like in the back, is an Oko machine. Yeah. Like it can just clean a team, and it's got enough natural bulk that, you know, if you're in like a 2v1 scenario and Rillaboom's the last thing on the field, a lot of the time you still lose.
Yep. But yeah, I think this team's going to have a lot of success. I think it is obvious. Like, this is... Some of the other teams, like, you could make some arguments against, but this team is, like, obviously good at every level. It's got speed control both ways. It's got power. It's got awesome support with the Comfey and the grassy terrain. Like, yeah, this team's going to be an absolute menace this season. But moving on, we've got our final overall power rankings for the Johto division. And like Ryan was saying earlier, these are not predictive at all. They're just where we see the teams based only on the way they were drafted standing. More an exercise for fun than anything else. But do you have any closing thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, these teams were really fun to analyze. I do think that, like I said, overall, I think these teams were much stronger than the VBA teams last season. It was really difficult to sort of tier a lot of these teams. I do stand by, though, a lot of those top teams having some advantages over some of those more middle pick teams, where I think that really kind of put them over the edge. Dan and I definitely also had more disagreements on this list, which is probably a good thing. Generally speaking, if you are causing if you look through the rankings, there's a ton of tiebreakers. And if you see a lot of tiebreakers that are going in Dan's favor, then you know that, like, there was definitely some more contentious team placements this go around compared to last time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I had a lot of fun doing this Johto one. We're going to be recording the Kanto one pretty soon as well. It might be up already depending on when you guys are watching it, or if not, you have that to look forward to in the near future. But thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Please tell me exactly what I got wrong in the comments and how you're going to be coming for me in the playoffs. But without anything else, I will see you guys next time. Bye.